Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for episode 36 of the Clown Fiesta podcast. Blue Jay and JNT 250 bringing you every week's episode, and of course, this one as well. We are reaching towards the end of playoffs already. We saw a amazing series between Cloud9 and Team Liquid this past weekend. We saw a amazing, for different reasons, series between 100 Thieves and TSM. Kind of different stories from these two series. Pretty crazy ones, though, wouldn't you say, JNT?
Yeah, I mean, you could say that, Cloud9 versus Team Liquid was like the better series in terms of the gameplay, but in terms of entertainment, I think everybody thought that the 100 Thieves TSM series was more entertaining.
Yeah, like the Cloud9 TL series was much more cleaner. The 100 Thieves TSM was like, what am I watching? This is unbelievable. And some people honestly absolutely hate those series. Some people absolutely love them. I don't know what to think about them. I'm very much in the middle because I do absolutely love them until I remember it's playoffs that we're watching and I'm like, oh no. Like if that's a regular season game, I am so much more cooler with it. But the problem is that at the end of the year, we need to send 3 teams to Worlds, and right now we only have 2. Or after this weekend, it looks like we only have 2 that look like they might belong there. Although I will say, I still have hope for TSM being able to turn it around. We just didn't see anything too great this weekend. But before we get to all of that, we got some other stuff to talk about. We're gonna do something fun this week, so we're gonna do a prop sheet, letting you guys know about it. We're probably going to do a stream tomorrow. So what day is tomorrow? Tomorrow is Tuesday of this week. So depending on when you're listening to us, the prop sheet may already be available to you. But what JNT and I are going to do is we're going to make it live on stream. So people that want to help us make the prop sheet and give ideas of what we should put on there, feel free to do so. It will be absolutely free to enter. You don't got to worry about how much do I have to pay to enter or anything like that. It's free to enter. And like I said, we're going to do it live on stream, hopefully with your guys' help so that you guys can have some input on what's on there. It will be fun stuff like who's going to win the series. This is for the whole finals weekend. It could be like who's gonna or will what champions will be played in finals, or how many games will be played in finals. Who's gonna get the most dragons, things like that. Just use your imagination because I think we could do a lot of different fun things with it. But we will go over all that stuff on stream. We're gonna do it at 9 p.m. EST on Tuesday, so that will be 6 p.m. for Westerners, 6 p.m. PST, and hope to see some of you guys there. Another thing is that we got a subscribe button last week. And so we wanted to give a huge shout out to all you guys that have been supporting the podcast. We now have a subscribe button. You guys have an easy and quick way to support us. And well, we already saw just a little while ago Juru coming in with the sub. So thank you so much for that. And yeah, you guys have been great. You guys have been supporting us on all of our platforms, whether it be Twitch, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the whole thing. You guys have been great. So we just wanted to thank you guys so much for all your support. And now that we've got that stuff out of the way, I think we can jump into some topics for this week. First up, we're going to talk about some stuff going on around the world because MSI is approaching. And so we thought it was a little bit fitting to start talking about some of the other regions and maybe some teams that we might see play the NA representative at MSI. So JNT, I'll let you start us off. What region do you want to go after first?
I mean, let's talk about the LCK because I think the LCK, they're going to be the region that finishes first in terms of who their MSI representative is going to be. But if you haven't been following the LCK has their finals next Saturday, 5 a.m. EST. So if you want to watch the series, you're going to have to go, might have to have a sleepless night there. But the two teams in the finals are Damwon and Gen G. The two teams in the LCK that have been the number 1 and 2 teams the whole way of the split. I think there was a question if, coming into playoffs, was Hanwha Life or T1 going to be able to rival those two teams, because both of those two teams have been playing quite well towards the end of the split. T1, they got their, they seem to have figured out their roster. They had Kana top lane, Cuz, Faker, Def Carrier, or it's not Def, sorry, Teddy Carrier. And, once that, roster kind of came back together, Team 1 looked very good. They 2-0'd a bunch of teams. They were expected to give, Gen G a good run for their money in that series. But the way that, both of those semifinal matches turned out, it was a a swift 3-0 out of Damwon and Genji.
Yeah, and don't worry, guys. We're not going to go too much into depth with this stuff because this is still an LCS podcast. But wow, holy crap! Watching the Gen G T1 series was absolutely unreal. I couldn't believe how much Faker got gapped in the mid lane by BDD. That's not something I was expecting. And like you said, T1 was starting to look really good. So there was a lot of people. Actually, they showed different analysts and casters' predictions before the games or before that series specifically, and 10 out of 11 all had T1, and then Gen G came out and just smacked them and 3-0'd them, and BDD was a huge part of that. So looking at Damwon and Gen G going into the finals this weekend coming up, I think that no matter what, LCK is sending a really, really good team to MSI. And so if for those of you that don't know, the LCS is going to be in the same group at MSI with the LCK, and so it's already an for LCS, I have to say.
Yeah. And just some little extra, the cherry on top for the LCK, if you're interested or follow it at all, the All-Pro teams just got released. I think it was this morning. Just to run them down real quick. First team All-Pro was Khan, Canyon, and Showmaker, all from Damwon. The bot lane was Ruler and Carrier. Second team was Rascal from Genji, Pioshik from DRX, Chovy from Hama Life, Teddy from T1, and Damwon, Barrel from Damwon. Kind of interesting that Teddy actually made second All-Pro team, considering he was out for a solid portion of the season, because they're giving what's your boy's
Gumayushi.
name? Gumayushi. Epic name on that guy.
Gumayushi. I don't know. People say it differently, but the problem is I watch too much less when it comes to LCK, and he never says any names right, so I don't know what to believe.
Yeah, and
Match rocks and
yeah, and the third team was Kingen from DRX in the top lane, Clid and BDD from Gen G, Ghost from Damwon, and Life from Gen G in support.
All this to say, K is still looking really good. What a surprise, right? We're gonna have problems with that one, I think, come MSI. But LPL, I haven't watched a lot of LPL this year, but I did look to see what was going on with the LPL, and well, it looks like a lot of the same. A lot of the regular we're seeing in the LPL, right?
Yeah, so the remaining teams that are in the LPL playoffs still are RNG, FPX, EDG, Top Esports, and Suning. There's still a ton more playoffs to go in the LPL, so there's not really a clear picture, what, the rest of the way is going to look like. Just to give people a bit of perspective, RNG and EDG are the top two seeds in the LPL. EDG, I think they were 14-2 on the regular season. RNG was 13-3. They were both sort of that level above the rest of the teams in the LPL, kind of similar to how Cloud9 and Team Liquid are operating right now. I think the overall thought is that it's going to be one of those teams representing China out of the LPL for MSI. But as we know, there are a ton of powerhouse teams in the LPL. Like, let's not forget about FPX, just recently won Worlds. Top Esports, still a very feared team in terms of their individual talent. And Suning, who just made World Finals. So should be a pretty spicy end to the LPL, and we'll just have to see who's repping China at MSI.
Yeah, and the only team that I've really been following from LPL is Suning, and I haven't really followed them a lot. I just know that they had a really rough start to the split in comparison to their expectations, and they started getting better and better as the split went on. So I don't think people can sleep on that team at all. And yeah, there's just a lot of good teams coming out of the LPL. Let's talk a little bit about LEC though, because I think we both watched all of those series, right, this past weekend.
Yep.
Yeah, and some really interesting stuff. Where do you want to start with this one?
Let's go with the obvious. We had G2 Mad Lions. It was a big banger, that one. I don't think anybody was really expecting Mad Lions to take down G2 in honestly a pretty convincing fashion. I think if you look at those 4 games, G2 just got straight up outplayed in games 2 and in games 4. And while, yes, you can say that G2 kind of threw game 1 a little bit, I still think, looking back on it, it was actually a really good job by Mad Lions kind of staying in that game, sort of matching G2's punches. Like, a lot of teams in the LEC can somehow get lost in this very fast, aggressive playstyle that G2 can play. And, when teams are really able to perform against G2, it's when they are able to match that style. When G2's going and making plays, you're making plays in response, or you have enough power in your team composition to fight back.
Yeah, I completely agree with when you say matching. That's what it looked like. It looked like in every role, G2 was being able to be matched, which is something we never see, right? We usually see them stomp in quite a few roles, honestly. And if one guy's not playing so well, someone else on the team picks it up and just carries them like, hella hard. And that's not exactly something we saw. I was really impressed with Kaiser, honestly. I was really impressed with the whole team of Mad Lions, to be quite honest, because I didn't think they looked that great at the start of the split, but they got better and better as the split went on. And next thing you know, they're in the finals. And now we're going to see we're going to see Rogue go up against G2 to fight for that finals spot to represent at MSI. What do you think about Rogue?
Yeah, I think Rogue versus G2 is going to be a super interesting series, mainly because um, G2 has kind of always had Rogue's number in the past in terms of how G2 plays against them. Normally, it's very like G2 favored in terms of whether they're going up facing each other in best of ones or best of fives, and I think that's mainly because like Rogue is your classic textbook like League of Legends team who likes to scale for the late game and kind of wins through fantastic team fighting and macro decision making in the late game. Whereas G2, when they're at their peak, they're this wild card team that can come at you with anything, whether it's like flex picks in multiple roles. You can never understand their draft until like the timer of like swaps is actually done. And they are a very aggressive team in the early game. And I think what we're still seeing that team fighting prowess from Rogue. But on the G2 side, we're not seeing their early game punches be as effective. And at times they do have to result to their team fighting, I think. And you can point to that Mad Lions game in the Mad Lions G2 game 1, where Mad Lions was able to claw their way back into the game, matching G2 and then beating them in the late game where it mattered.
Yeah, right now it seems to me like any one of those teams can beat the other. I think a lot of people will favor G2 going into the series and going into the finals if they make it there. But yeah, it's weird to me that G2 isn't the obvious favorite like they normally are. So that's a little bit different. And well, we saw Fnatic get kind of destroyed by Schalke and they got 3-0'd. And
Yeah.
well, there was some interesting stuff to come out of that. Do you want to share with people what came out of that, or do you want me to go ahead? I got the tweet
Yeah,
pulled up here.
yeah, you can straight up. Basically, Self-Made had some thoughts to post on Twitter after the series.
Yeah, so after the series, Selfmade went to Twitter and said, "To be honest, I don't even feel bad about losing today. It's pretty clear we were bad this split and we barely made it to playoffs thanks to other teams. I think the first two games we kind of trolled draft wise, but game 3 we pulled out Fnatic special and then ended up as always, see ya in summer." And then the next day he tweeted out, "Never mind, feels fucking terrible." So a little bit to break down there. One, I get where he's coming from. When you're not performing well, you probably don't feel like you belong there, and you don't feel like you belong, like you don't feel like you should move. And he probably got a lot of flack from the fans for tweeting that, wouldn't you say?
I mean, yeah, it's hard to say like it's hard to like deny that he's not wrong with this tweet because I think there was always that expectation of Fnatic while they did have like a rocky split in terms of their consistent performances. I think everybody just had that idea that, come playoffs, Fnatic will figure it out like they always seem to do. And this is sort of like the first split where that hasn't happened. And one thing that I was always thinking, how much of a factor was Reckless in terms of that consistent leader and just in general like insanely high level player who can kind of bring them back, refocus them, and make those improvements for playoffs. We're kind of seeing a whole new look Fnatic here with upset Niski and their whole new coaching staff with Yamato Cannon. And it's hard to say, but depending on the results of Summer Split, we could potentially see Fnatic sort of being overtaken by these younger, newer teams in Mad Lions, in Rogue, and maybe in Schalke.
Maybe Schalke, because they're like, who
Yeah,
knows
maybe.
what the hell.
Yeah, that's why
Who
I
knows
said a
what to
maybe
think
on
of
them.
them? Yeah, no, but I think that's a reason. Like, I do think it is a maybe. Like, I don't know what to think of Schalke at the moment. Like, yeah, they're great, and then oh, they're bad. So who knows? But the thing that was interesting for me was when he said, "Okay, never mind, feels fucking terrible." Like when he tweeted out the next day to fault when he replied to his own tweet was, "I wonder how much of this is like the fans like getting upset and like he shouldn't have tweeted that, and he's just like, oh, fine, leave me alone. It feels terrible,' or if it was." It really hit him the next day, like, damn, like we're not in playoffs. And he's like, wow, this actually feels terrible. I didn't know which way to look at it. I think there's a few ways to look at that small little text of tweet, but yeah,
I
I mean,
would
I'm
go
not in his
with
head, so
the
I don't know.
latter, what you said. Like it probably
The
didn't hit
damn, like
him.
shit, like I didn't realize how much this was gonna matter
Yeah.
to me. Yeah, that's what I think as well, to be
Mhm.
quite honest. But yeah, it definitely made me wonder. Um, no pun intended. Okay, so who do you think is going to MSI then? From Europe, that is.
I would still put my money in G2. One thing that I do think with the whole new playoff format changes that the LCS and the LEC has implemented, I do think there is a lot of value in actually being a lower bracket team in the finals weekend. Because I do think having that extra series on Saturday before Sunday is actually, or I think if you really see it's Friday, it's I don't know, whatever it is. But I think having
Yeah.
that extra series before you play the finals is actually really really important because it sort of warms you up for the finals and you don't feel like you're going into game one cold. Part of that, I if you think back to TSM's like lower bracket run from 2020 summer, I think a lot of that had to do with TSM. They played a ton of games in that lower in that whole playoff series because they were in upper bracket, had to run through the whole lower bracket, had a ton of 5-game series. They had the one against Golden Guardians, the one against FlyQuest in the finals, and I think the TL one in the
I think they went
semifinals.
5 against.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they went
I think
five
so.
against TL as well. And when you think about how many games you're playing and how much practice you're really getting, a quote unquote on stage practice, I think it really matters. So I would still put my money on G2. I think individually they're still like the best, but in terms of their actual team play, I think Rogue and Mad Lions are pretty equivalent right now.
Yeah. So, what's interesting to me is that, well, I want to do that. I want to counter that just because I think a lot of people would argue, well, you're also showing what champions are going to play by playing more games, right? Like Mad Lions gets to see what they put into a 5 game
That's
series
fair.
the day before, which really matters a lot. And I would also say that in that run that TSM made last year, no teams used the information that they got. We
It's
saw
true.
them play through top lane the whole freaking lower bracket run, and by finals they were still like just playing Ornn in the top lane, and Solo was just picking a tank into some days carry, and they were just going top over and over again and snowballing top lane. So I would say that in Europe it's probably going to be punished a lot more getting all the information. So I think that it actually hurts them there. And the last thing that I'll say about this is that this is one of those weird scenarios where I think the chances of moving on to MSI fit exactly what like the mathematical chances are. And what that means is like you have a 50% chance to win your semifinals. And then because there's two teams, one of two will move on. And then a 50% chance to win finals. And I think that it actually matches that. I think that Mad Lions have a 50% chance, approximately, guys, approximately, of going to MSI. And I would say 25-25 for G2 and Rogue, just because, like I said before, all these teams are kind of able to beat each other right now, and you're seeing them perform well and then not perform as well. Like you're seeing so much variation in gameplay that I think that the chances of each team going to MSI is about close to the mathematical chances, which is really odd to me considering G2's in here. Normally, I would always have G2 going to MSI, and I think it's about 25% right now.
Yeah, and I mean, in that scenario, in a sense, it does favor Mad Lions that they already have that spot in the finals because
Right.
you would much rather, you know, don't have to play an extra series in a team that you are likely to potentially lose or win. Like I would definitely agree with you. I think any of these teams can beat the other, and you would much rather play one series than two series in that case.
Yeah. Before we move on, do you want to call I think there was a couple things you wanted to touch on with Wonder and Yankos, right?
Yeah, there was just some G2 stuff that was popping up on Reddit and Twitter. Uh, One thing that Wonder has kind of been memed on for most of his career now, it feels like, is that he doesn't play a ton of solo queue. There's been a lot of discussion that we've had on previous episodes about the impact the solo queue can, that the impact that solo queue can have on your performances, when it comes to practice, or whether, some people actually believe that solo queue it's not very impactful in terms of your on stage performance. But basically, it was just a Reddit post saying that Wonder had played like 13 games in one day. It was the day right after they lost their series. And basically, what that post was saying was that those 13 games that Wonder played was like somewhere in the ballpark of like 14% of his total solo queue games on the season. He was like, apparently his highest rated solo queue account is only like D1. And it's kind of surprising to me that like one of the top players in the LEC, he's just only sitting at D1. And I know there's the whole argument that we've talked about before with Licorice, where he openly said that he doesn't play a lot of solo queue, but mainly focuses more on like 1v1s because he thinks 1v1s are really important in top lane. But interesting to see that Wonder is playing more solo queue. The other,
So
oh, go
hold
ahead.
on, hold on. I do want to touch on that because to me, I think that's really interesting that he's not playing a lot of solo queue, and I think that that is a sign of a player that is going to decline. You mentioned Licorice not playing a lot of solo queue. I think we've seen him decline in the last couple of years. I would even go. Xmithy was another guy that didn't like to play a lot of solo queue. He was a D1 solo queue guy for quite some time, and we saw him fall off. Now, not that Xmithy was awful, not that Licorice was awful, but we definitely saw them decline. And the thing that I guess I would have to say is it matters to me what they're replacing that solo queue time with, right? Maybe some of these guys got really good players that they can practice with. Maybe they can play with some academy teams or something along those lines. And if that's the case, then I'm totally fine with someone playing less solo queue. But I definitely think that you can't become complacent and just not practice and expect to stay at the top. I just don't think it works that way. And we did see Wonder struggle a little bit in the Mad Lions series. So
Yeah,
maybe I'm looking into it a little bit too much, but I think he's starting to realize, look, I need to practice a little bit more. I need to get some reps in, and so even if it is solo queue.
yep. I think he could also just be memeing because Wonder does like to meme a lot. I think well,
True.
everyone knows he plays a lot of WoW, and that's what he always talks about. The other G2 kind of little thing I wanted to touch on was there was a Twitch clip from Yankos' stream that kind of crept near the top of the League subreddit a couple days ago, basically saying how, it was a stream he did the day after, their defeat to Mad Lions, basically just talking about how G2 doesn't really have much of a leader currently, and that, there's not like that one person on the team who takes a leadership role. It's more of like an ecosystem of everybody saying their piece, and basically just outlining that he kind of wants to take the lead in terms of this week of practice. And he kind of basically, it was just assumed that with PERKZ, having left the team and them being so vocal, that PERKZ was such an important factor in terms of their late game decision making and him being that leader. Now that G2 doesn't have that, it's pretty interesting to see how Yankos says he's going to sort of step up and maybe fill that role.
Yeah, what's weird to me is that it's taken this long for them to identify that they need a leader, Like that's the weird thing to me. Like you had to take a whole split to realize that you need a leader. That's a little odd. Doublelift was saying on his co-stream that he didn't really know how to feel exactly about whether you need a leader. Like he mentioned how he doesn't think it's that important. I actually kind of think it's really important, honestly, because you never know when things are going to start to go bad. And I think it's those moments where you absolutely need a leader, and you can't just be like, "Oh, this guy can be a leader now." Like you need to have someone that's ready to take on these kind of issues because you never know when they're going to creep up. So that was the only thing that was really interesting about it to me was like all of a sudden you deciding you need a leader. Like I thought that was obvious, but I don't know, maybe it's just I'm a little bit more traditional that way. And I've followed traditional sports like my whole life, and there's always talk about how important leaders are, whether it be in the dressing room for hockey or on the sidelines for football, whatever it is, right? You hear about it so often how important it is. I just thought that that's something that would translate to any team sport or esport, but maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to exactly decipher. It's hard to decipher what he exactly means by that. But I do think it is very important in your League of Legends team that you do have that one voice that is that decision maker in crunch time. I think people kind of associate the term leader and think of like, oh, this person kind of like micromanages the team and is the one who's calling all the plays. And I don't think it really works like that anymore. League of Legends is so like fluid now in terms of like what goes on in the early game with like getting priority for your jungler, pushing your waves, coordinating tower dives, rotations and everything. And I think it kind of is on the whole team to be able to discuss these things and plan out their gameplay. But I do think when it does come to crunch time, you do need that one person who kind of puts his foot down and says like, we're doing this, go for this. Like that person who's thinking on their feet, and the team follows that.
Absolutely. I agree. Anything else, or do we want to get into playoffs that just happened last week?
Yeah, I mean, let's move on to our NA series. The first series that we had on Saturday was the C9 Team Liquid series. This was definitely I think I predicted a 3-1 C9, but I didn't really think that the series was going to play out the way that it did. It kind of felt like every game was just a stomp, honestly. Cloud9 was doing a lot of early game centric drafts in games 1, 2, and 4. Team Liquid sort of did the same in game 3. And it was kind of just seemed that in draft and in the gameplay, the game was really decided in the first 15 minutes.
Yeah, every single win was pretty, like you said, stompy. And The thing that I took away from this series, so first of all, it was a really good series as far as gameplay goes. I think this is the best we've seen two teams look so far this year. A lot of people thought TL looked bad. I didn't think they looked that bad. And the reason why I thought these games were so stompy was because it seemed like the advantages that were getting grabbed by both teams were almost things that had no counterplay. And that's when a team is playing really well, is when you're doing something and the other team can't do much about it. Now, of course, there always is some way of playing around something, but here's an example. So in game 1, they go Renekton Nidalee, they go top immediately, and that's something where Alfari's stuck under his turret. What is he going to do there? It's point and click CC into a Nidalee spear into burst. That's the kind of stuff where it's like, I can't fault Alfari for doing something wrong there. He just got freaking destroyed, and I don't think there's much he can do. That's what I'm talking about when I say there's not a lot of counterplay. And I feel like there was so many of those plays in this series where the team that was making a play was just so fluid in what they're doing. There was the one play on, it was Jensen playing Silas. He chains. This is under PERKZ's tower. PERKZ is sitting under tower. You would think he's super safe. Jensen chains him. You get a flash Core JJ hook from Nautilus into a flash bear slap from Santorin. What is PERKZ supposed to do against that? Like, dodge the chain's forehead. Like, that is like such a difficult, no one is ready for that kind of chain CC to happen. And so those are the plays where I'm just like, these teams are playing great right now. Like, I was really impressed with the series this weekend.
Yeah, like if you were to be like super nitpicky, like to go to like the top lane dives, like what you could say is like, oh, like they're playing Renekton Italy, and you should know that they're going to be looking for dives and whatnot. But when I was going back and looking at these games, it's not like, you know, the TSM Summer 2020 where TSM was stacking waves and then diving top lane on a huge stacked wave to kill the enemy top laner and then deny him a big wave. They were just straight up diving top on pushed waves. The 2 times that Blabber went top lane, once with PERKZ, once with a PERKZ teleport, and once just like pre-level 6, was basically just Fudge pushing in one wave and then just insta-diving. And I can't exactly fault Santorin for not being, you know, there to protect the wave, because when you're playing the game like that, it's not like you're thinking, oh, I need to be protected on this wave. It's just like a single 6 minion, no cannon wave. Like, if I was in that game, like, I wouldn't really be thinking about those kinds of things. Obviously, when you're getting huge waves stacked into you, I think it is your job as a jungler to recognize that, oh, they could be diving this wave. I should be near top side in case, you know, a big dive is going to happen. But like you said, in that game, it was just a lot of great coordination from both teams in the early games in terms of getting their plays. Like, exactly like you said, PERKZ died in 2 spots where you would never expect that you're going to die there. Like, he got 3-man mid 2 times in that game 3 where Jensen was playing Silas. And then even in game 4, Team Liquid was doing as much as they could to try to shut down PERKZ on the Lucian in that game. There was that play where kind of it was a bit tragic on TL side where Alfari kind of went for like a tower dive with PERKZ living with 1 HP and Blabber killing him in return. But there was a ton of pressure early and often from both of these teams in the game. And like you said, you know, you can't really fault either side for the plays resulting like it did.
You know what was weird about this series was the number of mid lane ganks there were. I haven't seen this many mid lane from both teams, by the way. I haven't seen this many mid lane ganks in forever. It feels like teams are never playing around mid, in LCS specifically. And that was one thing that I really liked to see. It was like, okay, finally, we're actually seeing people able to make plays in the mid lane. We very rarely see what we saw this past weekend. It was unreal how much pressure was put on both mid laners. But I will say that even though there was a bunch of pressure put on both mid laners, I think we definitely saw PERKZ be able to shine regardless of how much pressure was put on him. We in the Silas, was it? I think he was on Silas one of the games where he was dove many times, and yet by the end, I think it was game 1, and by the end he's still like 4-1-1. Maybe that's before the end of the last fight, but he's still 4-1-1 going into a Baron fight. I remember, and I'm just like, wasn't this guy getting camped? And it was like, wow, this is a sign of playoff PERKZ. This is the stuff that we've all been waiting for, you know?
Yeah, and that's the main thing about PERKZ that I think, you know, one of the reasons why he's so great and one of the reasons why he is kind of this highly touted player is, and I think in a lot of other players would sort of crumble under the pressure with them getting ganked repeatedly and them sort of maybe backing off a little bit and playing a lot like weaker in terms of like, oh, I'm getting really ganked this series, like, oh, I should play a bit back, or oh, I shouldn't push my advantages too hard. And that's kind of the opposite of what we saw. Like, despite PERKZ getting ganked a bunch from Team Liquid, he was still going even in CS. He was still making aggressive lane plays. He was still helping out his team around the map, like in that game 1 play where he's using his teleport to go dive Alfari on the top side. He's roaming around on his Rise in game 3 and, making plays top lane, catching out Jensen in that tri-brush. I can't speak. Yeah, but I think, this is kind of like you said, playoff perks. Like, this is what people expected when Cloud9 brought PERKZ in. I think it took a bit of time to ramp up, but I think we're really seeing like PERKZ at his like peak potential.
Yeah, and honestly, I know PERKZ was the better player, but I still thought Jensen played really well as well. I know a lot of people won't like hearing that, but we saw him sidestep a bunch of stuff. That's classic Jensen, by the way.
Yeah, in that game too.
Being able to dodge all these little abilities. I'm like, this guy's scripting out there. Like, again, I mentioned how much pressure there was mid, and Jensen absorbed it really well, just like PERKZ did. I guess PERKZ just did a little bit better. One little thing that I was going into this series paying attention to was draft, and specifically because we talked about it and so many people talked about it, was who was going to get Tristana, and it looked like TL had to go with the Tristana ban. No surprise there. I wonder how much that had an impact on the series, because I would say you would have to argue that always being forced to ban one thing would definitely hurt, and so many people said that they didn't like TL's drafting. I wonder how much that has to do with being forced to ban Tristana all the time.
Yeah, I mean, to talk about the Team Liquid drafting, like, I didn't think their drafting was like really terrible by any means. The only draft
I didn't think so either.
The only draft that I would say was terrible was their Game 3 draft, and it wasn't really terrible in the sense that the draft was terrible. It was just surprising to me that Team Liquid did a complete 180 on their games 1 and 2 draft, from opting to the scaling team comp. I think game 2 was sort of just like a refined version of their game 1 comp. In terms of they got the Senna TK, and they put the Seraphine in the mid lane as opposed to putting it support, because in my opinion, I think the Seraphine mid lane is much more important than putting Seraphine support, because support is really important right now in terms of getting a playmaker, or if you want to run that Senna Tahm Kench. And you really saw in that game 2, Team Liquid's comp was like absolutely unkillable. Like, there was like a mid lane team fight where Cloud9 had a 5v4 team fight where like Alfari was not there, only threw in a Gangplank ultimate, but Cloud9 does like a full engage on the Seraphine mid lane. He gets gobbled up. They get like 3-man charmed in return, and like they basically did no damage at the end of the day after the Seraphine heals and the Tahm Kench heal and the Senna Qs. That draft in game 2 was like really ridiculous. Like, I remember we were watching that game and we saw that game 2 draft, and it was like, oh Jesus, like Cloud9 literally they have to stomp the early game as hard as they did in the first game for them to even have a chance of winning this game.
Yeah. I would say that even though I think it's better to have Core JJ on a playmaker, I will say he had a really nice play with the prediction on Sven in the bot lane where he had that ult. I think that was about it for that game as far as like really nice outplays. But again, when you get him on like an Alistar, a Nautilus, a whatever kind of playmaker, I think you're getting more value out of Core JJ. But to your point, where Cloud9 is picking these very different kind of comps, I think that's the best takeaway for Cloud9 and for Cloud9 fans this past weekend, is not just that they looked good, but they looked good on very, very different styles. The all-in, what was it? It was Renekton, Nidalee, you had Kalista and Alistar, like your very early game, we're going to dive you and kill you comp, and then they had the Rise Jinx later on, where we're just going to try to peel off fights, we're just going to play really slow, wait and scale, and then once we hit 3-4 items, absolutely smash you. And that's exactly what they did in the Rise Jinx game. I just thought, wow, it's unbelievable how they're able to play these two very, very different comps at such a high level against what is obviously the other really good team in the region, and they made it look really easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think games 1 through 3 were definitely sort of like the game was won through draft. I mean, not to say that Team Liquid was like doomed in game 1 after the draft, but just the way that Cloud9 executed the draft, it was just, it just gave them that huge advantage in the early game for them to snowball through. And I think that's what's really important when you run these very early aggressive drafts, is you need to be able to snowball your lead. You saw in games 2 and 3, in game 2, Cloud9 didn't get that early advantage, or didn't get a big enough advantage to be able to snowball that lead and against that team comp. And the same thing in game 3. Team Liquid did a bunch of fantastic stuff in the early game around mid lane, but when PERKZ was able to stay in it, it just got to a point where Team Liquid couldn't beat the Cloud9 team comp. There was that team fight at Third Dragon, where Jensen and Alfari were diving Sven in the backline, and they 100-0 the Jinx, and the Jinx did not a lot of damage. But when you just have like Ryze sitting there machine gunning all your melee champions, you kill one carry, but the other one's still alive.
Yeah, and a little bit more talk about how they were able to play different stuff. I want to talk about Sven specifically because he played the Callista, which is super early, and then I mentioned before he played the Jinx, which is super late. But he also played the Ashe, and he looked good on all of it. I thought he had a really good series. Kind of, I don't want to say quietly because he kind of was popping off on the Jinx as well, but I mean PERKZ is popping off a little bit more, so that's why I want to say quietly having a good series. He just had good games on whatever you could put him on anything and he would perform on it, which is very, very good. And then we saw Vulcan back on Alistair, and we've seen his Alistair be great, and he had a really good series, specifically in the Alistair. Yeah, C9's looking good, top through bottom in this one. And let's talk about top, because I think that was the biggest worry going into the series, right? Would Fudge be able to hold up to Alfari? Well, not only was he able to do that, I would say that he outplayed Alfari. And yes, Alfari got hella camped. I understand that. But that's sometimes what you need to do, is you need to be able to shut down the best players from the other team. Cloud9 was able to do that. God knows TL tried to shut down PERKZ and it just didn't work, right? And I think that's one of the biggest differences in this series, was how much effort was put into shutting down Alfari with success, and how much effort was put into shutting down PERKZ without success.
Yeah, what was weird to me, because I'll kind of ignore top lane in terms of games 1 and 2, because in game 1, yes, Alfari got camped, can't do much there. In game 2, was really weird that Cloud9 decided to pick Sion into the gangplank and sort of give Alfari a free scaling matchup. But specifically in games 3 and 4, what was really weird on the Team Liquid side for me is them sort of sacrificing Alfari's early game advantages that he had in both games 3 and 4, because he was playing, quote-unquote early game champions in the Renekton and in the Volibear against Sion, champions that are supposed to bully the Sion early and get ahead, but their decision to sort of take that advantage and try to influence it elsewhere on the map. We saw with the Volibear game, we saw Alfari go mid lane 2 times. With the Renekton game, we saw him go mid lane 2 times again, and with Team Liquid, not really able to get much of a lead in mid lane, it ended up sort of sacrificing all the work that Alfari had done in the top lane to sort of allow Fudge to just reach, 1.5 items on Sion where you just become unkillable.
Well, and that was the worry, right? Like, what if you put him on a Sion and he just gets smashed by Alfar? It didn't happen. I thought his Sion was great. Like, yeah, you're gonna fall behind in CS, of course.
Dude,
but so many of his ultis were great.
They gotta bring back Sion Speedway for Fudge to play, dude.
True. Yeah, true.
His Sion ults were really nice. His movement was really clean in jungle.
They were very, very good. Not just the one where he drifted through the whole jungle, but some of them where he was engaging. His angles were great. Like, I was so surprised because, well, as people that listen to this podcast know, I have been pretty cold on him for probably most of the split. Up until recently, I've been pretty cold on him until the last 2 or 3 weeks, I would say. And yeah, damn, that he is definitely not a liability. That's what we were all afraid of, right? Definitely not.
Definitely in that game 4, I think their coordination with the Ashe ult and the Sion ult was really, really good in terms of like cutting off angles, or like noticing that like once TL is sort of pinched on like a wall, firing that Ashe ult with the Sion ult to come over the top was really, really good. Yeah, I think everybody on Cloud9 played really well. I can't point to any Cloud9 player that, wasn't playing well. I think everybody had their moments in that series. And on the Team Liquid side, I definitely agree. I don't think Team Liquid played bad by any means. I said this is my take on Hotline League, was that this series was just more about Cloud9 playing well and executing than Team Liquid underperforming.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, LS didn't exactly agree, but I completely agree.
Well, he didn't exactly disagree either.
Yeah, he was kind of on the fence, and not that he was, I shouldn't say on the fence, because that makes it sound like he had no opinion. He was very much, I agree with this, but I don't agree with that. One last thing that I want to ask you with this series specifically is, do we have a rivalry now? Because all split long, there was talk about, well, there's not really a rivalry in North America. You can't force rivalries to happen. I would say we do have a rivalry here. I think that these are definitely the 2 best teams, which that automatically makes things more interesting. But also with the banter back and forth between Twitter and I don't know, I think there's still a history with Jensen coming from Cloud9 going over to TL. Do you think there's a rivalry? I would say absolutely.
I think there's been a rivalry since like season 9 summer finals. I think that's when like Cloud9 and Team Liquid officially became like the number one rivalry in the LCS. I think for me, especially in a team where we have so few teams and there's not a lot of games being played between those teams, when it kind of comes down to is like which teams are playing each other the most. And Cloud9 is seemingly always meeting Team Liquid in important playoff matches, whether that's at the start of the season that we saw in Lock-In, whether it's this season in you know this weekend's match and maybe in the finals on Sunday. Last year, anytime there's a best of one between Cloud9 and Team Liquid, it's always hype because it normally will crown who is the best team in the NALCS right now. That's kind of always like what those two teams are fighting for. And you've had some epic best of fives. I mentioned the summer finals in Detroit, and you even go way back in the day. There was the gauntlet match between Cloud9 and Team Liquid in season 5, and like everyone always points to that. Like people don't remember, like that was the last time that Cloud9 beat Team Liquid in a best of 5. Was way back in season 5.
Yeah, and it was a crushing defeat. If I remember, the players on stage were definitely pretty upset about it. And the other thing that I will say about the rivalry thing too is I think Jensen sparked it a little bit at the start of the split. I tweeted about earlier, but we talked. Jensen mentioned how like he didn't think he learned much from PERKZ or something. This was after the lock-in tournament, I believe.
I think so.
But it was mid-January. I know that. But anyways, he was saying like I don't think that I'm gonna learn much from PERKZ. I think that I'm better than him. Something along those lines. Not a direct quote. Do not quote me on that. But yeah, that stuff sparks rivalry as well. And yikes, because I said this. You poked the bear, and that's what he did. And well, PERKZ showed up, and now you're gonna probably run into him again, which is a big uh-oh for TL. But should be interesting. I hope that that's the finals that we see, because I think that would be the best series as far as like. Well, yeah, I just think it would be the best series. I think it would be the most competitive.
Yeah, I think from what we saw in the TSM 100T series, it'd be a bit surprising if we didn't see this as the rematch.
Yeah, let's get to it, right? Let's
get it over with.
You start.
Let me just pull up the graphic here. Yeah, the story of this series was basically how much 100 Thief fucking sucks. That was the story of the series to me.
Yeah.
Oh. To kick it off, the biggest like, what's the word for it? Like the biggest problem, maybe you could say, with the series was the drafting out of 100 Thieves, them opting into this Jace versus Gnar pick 3 games in a row, and someday not being able to create much of an advantage in any of the games. The game where he got the biggest lead was in game 1 in terms of getting 2 kills on Huni early on to the game, getting about a 20 to 25 CS lead, but then someday just making a lot of mistakes in the side lane, getting caught out 2 times. One of them like nets TSM, I think like a Baron, where they caught out Jace and they saw him use his teleport in the top lane. They kill him. Maybe they started Baron or something, but someday it got picked up a lot in that first game, and in sort of games 2 and 3, TSM sort of figured out. I guess Huni sort of figured out how the lane goes. We even saw Huni like winning early trades and early lanes against Jace, basically from there on out. Like he was just going even in CS, and Huni's Gnar was just having a much bigger impact than some days Jace in these games.
I want to defend the draft though from 100 Thieves side of things, because I totally get the argument of why are you running this 3 times if the first 2 didn't go well. I get that, and I could actually see that angle. I just don't know what else you would do as 100 Thieves, because I don't see things going well if you're putting the games in Ryoma's hands. We saw him on Lucian. It didn't look good. He stepped on a bunch of Jinx traps or clampers, whatever the hell you want to call them, grenades. So you're seeing a guy get leads on the Jason to the Gnar, which is a counter matchup. Maybe you're thinking that's my only chance to win is if we could win through top lane. And to be fair, they were getting leads. But like you were saying, Someday was just giving them away. Specifically in game 1, he had a significant lead and died unnecessarily 3 times. That is too many times to be giving away kills and overextending. And I could understand if he's feeling like, well, we're not making anything happen anywhere else on the map. I got to apply a lot of pressure. Maybe he's thinking that. I don't know. But what I do know is that when the game is in your hands, you cannot die that many times and just give away leads. We saw that happen way too often. And I think there was a little skirmish that happened in the mid game where TSM just picked up 2 kills, and as soon as that happened, I was like, okay, TSM wins this game. They're just going to outscale them because the Jace won't be able to put as much pressure in the side lane. This game's over. Go next. And so I don't necessarily blame them for the Jace pick. To be quite honest, I think that they looked at that and went, "This is the only way we could win." We even saw Papa Smithy, the pregame interview, or there was an interview with Travis Gafford that they showed in the pregame. He didn't seem too confident in them either. It felt, man, they felt defeated before the series started, right?
Yeah. To be honest, like while I have a lot more to say than just like the Jace in terms of the drafting. I thought Ryoma on the ADC's mid definitely wasn't it. I think it was a bit of an I think it was game 1 where they picked him up on Tristana. But then they sort of continued to put him on like non-traditional mid laners. We saw him have a Lucian game as well, and you could kind of tell that he was pretty uncomfortable on those picks. These are picks that you're supposed to get ahead in lane, and in both of those games where he's playing Tristan Lucian, he's going even in CS against Power of Evil. Like you mentioned in game 1, right before like that Drake fight spawns where 2 of them die, Ryoma is literally walking into Jinx traps with his dash up and with his flash up, literally face checking and walking into them, getting blown up and dying. The other thing that I would say about the 100 Thieves drafts that I didn't like too much is just how much like they've fallen off and they've fallen out of love with the Olaf. Yes, what I will say is that I think Olaf has dropped a little bit in priority in terms of all of the teams in the league who like to play Olaf. Even Cloud9, we saw in their Team Liquid series that Olaf was actually open to the 4 games. The 2 games that Cloud9 was on blue side, they opted not to pick it in terms of picking once the Renekton and once the Hecarim. But I think that Olaf is Closer's best champion, and Olaf even fit their drafts more than the Hecarim did, because they were going with these very early aggressive lanes with the Jace top lane, with the ADC's mid lane, and I think Olaf kind of pairs perfectly with that in terms of we need to be able to run over this game and get ahead early, and Olaf is kind of that snowbally champion to do it.
I could get behind that because it is more of the snowbally champion, and that's clearly the way that they were looking to win, was to snowball. Obviously, they were looking to snowball through top, so I can get behind that. I will say that I still think Hecarim is the better pick, but I could see that way of thinking for how can 100 Thieves win a game? You got to smash and snowball.
Yeah,
so I could see with that logic. Okay, I can get behind that.
I'm definitely not saying that I think Olaf is better than Hecarim, because I do think Hecarim is probably the best jungle pick in the meta right now, but it was kind of clear from the get-go, the way that 100 Thieves was drafting, was they recognized that, hey, we are not going to win this game through playing traditionally and going late when it comes to late game macro decision making and objective control and team fighting, because of the way that they drafted. And if that's the case, where you're putting all your eggs into the early game basket, fucking do that and just pick Olaf and attempt to run the game over. Like that's the way I see it. Is that it was clear that the way they drafted, they weren't banking on the fact that they were going to be better at team fighting than TSM. And even in the games where we saw it go late, it was just so clear how uncoordinated and just like lost 100 Thieves looked in those decisions.
Well, and we talk about 100 Thieves looking really bad in this series, and it's because they did, but they did get leads in 3 of the 4 games. Like they had not massive leads. I want to be clear about that. They were usually around 2K. I would say they were usually about 2K leads, but also like usually 2K and a couple dragons. God, the amount of dragons that they got in this series was like absolutely insane. Considering they lost the series 3-1, I don't even know. Someone could fact check me, but probably around like 14 dragons or something like that. Maybe 15 if you count Elder. I don't remember. They had a lot. They had a lot of dragons. So it's not like TSM looked all that great either. 100 Thieves had all of the pressure, all the objectives, all of the everything going their way in the early games of these series, of this series. So yeah, honestly, 100 Thieves looked bad because they kept throwing all their leads, but TSM didn't look all that great either. And yeah, I don't think that you can be this far behind against C9 or TL if you're TSM and win the game. That's not going to happen. This, to me, winning this series 3-1 against 100 Thieves was not a clean win whatsoever.
Yeah, and it really makes me kind of think back to a lot of the previous TSM performances in this season, because TSM are just known to be we're going to scale late game and we're going to punish your mistakes kind of team. And I think the way that we saw both Cloud9 and Liquid was when, both of those teams in C9 and Liquid were executing very well. And exactly like you said, I don't think that TSM is going to be able to play this style where they're going to go down 2 to 3k in gold and 2 dragons early in the game and kind of salvage it back, unless it's through some sort of like draft kingdom where it's a similar situation to where we saw game 2 of C9 versus Team Liquid, where they just have this really OP late game comp with this Jinx Rise and you're playing into like 4 melee champions. I think unless that pops up, I don't have too much faith in TSM being able to themselves reclaim the lead away from one of these two teams.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I worry about is how TSM is too slow. I think that blame, so to speak, needs to go on a lot of people. I don't think it's simply just a Spica thing. I think that we've known for quite some time that PoE plays lane really slow and he plays to just get a CS lead in lane. And I don't think that's enough to have success at the international level, which again, I'll remind everyone, that's what TSM is after. They're not after North American success. They're looking for international success, and they've said that for some time. And I don't think the way PoE plays right now is good enough for that, even though I do think he's been great in North America this year. I don't think his play style is fitting what they're really aiming for right now. I think Spica is not making enough happen in the early game. I don't think Sword Art has been amazing, let's say. I do think that he started to look a lot better in mid to late split, where he's starting to roam around, but I still don't think they're making enough happen to get leads, and it's a problem. It's really a problem for TSM.
Yeah, and I mean, what was weird specifically about Spica was that, you know, TSM was going down very often in the early game, and Spica was on in Italy, and that's a champion that, one, Spica has shown a lot of success on in the past, and two, is supposed to be that early game aggressor in terms of farming up your camps, ganking a lot, getting early dragon and rift herald control just due to you having more gold and exp than the opponent. But and that's exactly to my point why I don't think that exact style is going to work against Cloud9 Liquid, because an Italy post 15 minutes is not going to be as useful as a Hecarim, a Udyr, an Olaf, a Lilia. And I think if you just kind of wait to scale on an Italy, it definitely won't be as effective against a much better and coordinated team.
Yeah, I agree. And
Ryoma was literally walking into spears in this series.
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah.
We were memeing.
Those were some nice spears, though. To give Spica some credit,
they were.
I thought that they were some decent spears. Yeah, so I don't want to take away full credit from Spica, because I still think Nidalee's probably his best champion. But again, we saw what Blabber did with Nidalee in game 1, and that's because he's got the point and click CC with the Renekton in the top lane. I don't think Spica had that in this series. Someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember any Renekton or TF paired with it or anything that, you know, is like free spear. But I want to talk a little bit more about 100 Thieves.
Wait, one thing I'll say about the Nidalee real quick, just while we're on the topic, was a new build sort of came out of the woodworks pretty randomly. Was that Everfrost is now like the go-to Nidalee build. I thought that was kind of an interesting build. I definitely think that the Everfrost works a lot better when you do have, as you mentioned, like your combo pieces with Nidalee, whether it's a TF, whether it's a Renekton, and you're just able to like really CC lock somebody down to guarantee the spear. Although it's a pretty cool build. Everfrost, you know, LCS is still on patch 11.5, right? Where Everfrost, the active, still deals more damage and isn't the cooldown hasn't been increased yet. So people still taking advantage of Everfrost being a bit busted on the previous patch. Just want to throw that in there. Thought it was pretty cool that both Blabber and Spica were running to Everfrost this weekend.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, because I do wonder what that's going to look like when the next patch comes out, or when they start playing on the next patch where Everfrost isn't so great. Okay, we talked about how 100 Thieves was getting all these leads. We didn't exactly talk about how they were throwing them away yet, and so I want to get into that a little bit. Honestly, just plays around objectives were quite bad. I know we said that they were getting a lot of dragons, sure, but when it came time to close out games, like the Baron objective or something like that, this is where they really struggled. The one game they had, I don't know if it was Soul. No, I think it was Elder, actually. They had Elder.
They had Elder in game 2.
Still couldn't pressure TSM off of Baron. That is unheard of. That to me was like, wow. I remember, I think Baron went down to like 2K or 2.2K, 2.4K, something like that. And they got cold feet and pulled off the Baron because they let the previous one go. I think Spica stole the previous one.
Yeah.
They really have a hard time setting up around Baron and being able to zone off when you have the advantage, when you're just stronger than the other team.
Yeah.
And that's That's an absolute problem right there. That's one of the reasons why they couldn't close out.
Like specifically in that instance of game 2, it felt like that 100 Thieves was just getting cold feet because of the previous play, because the previous Baron got stolen. And I think that, if that's the case, if the reason they're pulling off Baron is because they're nervous about the Spica Smite steal, and if that Baron gets stolen, that like drastically affects your game, I think that's honestly like a loser's mentality, because you can't be thinking like that in the moment, and you can't be making decisions based off of your previous decisions, which, to be honest, just basically came down to Spica jumping over the wall and out smiting. It's basically a 50-50. And I don't think you can make major objective control decisions based on the fear of, oh, but what if it gets stolen? Because I think in that situation, 100 Thieves is the team that was up in gold. They had Infernal Soul, they had Elder, and they have this like kind of disgusting Pope comp, and they're pulling off Baron with like 2.2k HP, and they kind of had TSM a bit zoned, but they just out of fear sort of back off.
Yeah, and the other thing too that I'll say is that I know even though they're getting all of those dragons, if you go back and look at how they're getting some of those dragons, like they're stealing some dragons where they have no business walking in to these dragons, and they're getting them, but TSM's kind of just letting them walk in. So first of all, I'm looking at it going, how is TSM letting them walk in right now? And two, why is 100 Thieves sticking around after they get the Baron, or after they get the dragons, pardon me? Like they're sticking around. Like the one play, Lilia has no ultimate. For some reason, he hit a swirl seed or whatever the hell it's called, and wastes his ultimate on trying to pick someone off that was nowhere near them.
This is in game 2.
Yes, this was in game 2. Game 2.
It was after.
Nightmare.
It was after 100 Thieves was in this game up 3-0 in drags at the time. They were going in and sort of trying to vie for like positioning on the Drake. They never had it. TSM got the Drake, and 100 Thieves for whatever reason is just sticking around randomly. And like you said, like there's just no reason for right after you've lost Drake to be just hanging around and just like waiting to get like.
So the play
punished.
that I'm talking about, they actually got the Drake. Like,
oh, okay, it might have been the one prior to that, them being 3-0.
But I don't know why TSM let him walk in on the Lilia, and then after you're a Lilia with no ulti, you're pretty freaking useless.
Yeah,
they stick around and look for the fight, and TSM just cleans up 3 kills, and I'm like, what? Like game 2, I think game 2 had to have been the worst game of the series. I think it was really, really bad. Both teams looking absolutely awful, and I know we keep hitting on this, but guys, it was bad.
Yeah,
oh my god, it was bad.
Oh man, like, man, well, since we're on the topic of game 2, like the whole sequence of events that ended the game, where Ryoma is like jumping in onto Power of Evil, who's like full build on Syndra, and he has to like jump in insta Zanyas to like live at 1 HP, and FBI kind of did like a bit of a repeat of Losers Bracket 2020, where he flashes into the whole enemy team. Sure, he trades the kill on Power of Evil, dies, and they get wiped and lose the game off of it. But yeah, like, guys, this series was a bad series out of both teams. Like, it was not pretty.
And you and I have praised FBI a lot this year, saying he was the best AD carry, or one of at the very least. I think we said he was the best AD carry in spring. He wasn't in this series, not at all.
Yeah.
He had some pretty bad plays. One time flashing over the wrong wall with Ashe, like flashing to a place where you have no business living after you flashed in that direction. He could have flashed over the Baron pit instead and actually been safe, flashing towards his teammates. He didn't do that. Then there was the one play where they hit the Ashe arrow and he Gale forced in, flashed in, and then just died immediately. Like it was quite bad out of FBI as well, which is one of the sadder things, because he's one of the players that we expected to perform on 100 Thieves, and he just didn't either. The one win that 100 Thieves did get was after like a coin flip Elder fight. They're just like, fuck it, flipping this Elder. They got the Elder and closed out the game, so that they did pick up a win in one play. But they looked so bad that even Doublelift was cheering for 100 Thieves at one point. By the way, I'll remind people that Doublelift is signed by TSM as a streamer at the moment for his co-streams and other content creation and whatnot. You could tell Doublelift is clearly like, 100 Thieves, please do this. It was that bad.
Yeah.
That the TSM streamer guy is going, please, 100 Thieves, do something right.
Yeah. What I will say, though, I'll push back a little bit, because I think FBI actually had a really good game 3 and 4. Obviously, they lost in game 4, but I still think his Triss was pretty good. And his Ezreal in game 3 was doing a lot of work. His Ezreal was doing a lot of work.
It was.
But games 1 and 2, his Ashe was very, very forgettable. His Ashe ultimates were basically non-existent, and the one time that he hit his Ashe ultimate, he flashed Gale Force into the whole enemy team and died.
Yeah.
So
I'm more forgiving. Like we were watching the TriCast of Meteor Sneak Double. I'm more forgiving on the Ashe ultis than most people are. That ability is slow and it gets dodged a lot. And yes, that's on the player to judge when someone is susceptible to being arrowed. So it's not just it's a hard ability, lol. Like it is more. There is more to it, and you should land more of them. But to me, I don't think it's automatic that you land that ability. So I'm a little bit easier on him for that. But yeah, it was still pretty bad. Okay, if we want to talk about some positivity, I would say Huni had a decent series.
Yeah.
Because he was put into pretty rough matchups. Mind you, he did have the one Nocturne game, but I think he played 3 games of Gnar into Jace.
Yeah, he
was that
played
right?
Gnar versus Jace the first 3 games.
And
then
I think
played
did he player of the
Nocturne into
series?
Scion. I don't even know who got it, to be honest.
I think he did. Something's telling me that he did. I think they told him in the interview after. I could be misremembering, but I think he did. And so I don't think it was all bad. But boy, oh boy, this was one of the series where the bad heavily outweighed the good. And so, yeah, it kind of feels bad, man, if I'm being completely honest. Okay, I'll finish off with a couple points here. One, TSM is not in the same place as C9TL. I think I've made that pretty clear. But I keep hearing about how like these are the 3 teams left, and so it's like, oh, we figured it would be C9TL, TSM. Sure, maybe we did think that, but they're not in the same conversation. Not in my opinion, anyways. I don't think TSM looked very good at all, as we mentioned, and so I don't think it's fair to talk about them as if they're a top tier team right now. They're not. C9TL are at their own tier, then TSM, and then there's a different tier below that where you get the 100 Thieves, EG, and Dignitas or whatever. But yeah, I think TSM's in their own little zone there in between the 2 gaps there.
Yeah, and what I will say is we'll just flash back to like the start of playoffs where I think a lot of people did think that C9TL and TSM were all sort of equal in terms of their overall skill. But what I'll say to that is just over the course of playoffs, it's just been more of TSM not looking too great in their best of 5s. And when they're winning, it's off the back of the opposing team playing poorly or throwing their games, as opposed to them sort of rising to the occasion and beating the other teams. I mean, I'll admit, I think they had a pretty good series against Team Liquid in that first playoff series, and that was cool. And I think people's opinion of TSM didn't drop too much because of that. But you take a look at that EG series, the sort of fashion that had happened. EG throwing a bunch of games. Then you go to this 100 Thieves series. Was a bunch of fucking dog shit. TSM won the series. And on the flip side, you look to your teams like Cloud9 and Liquid. Liquid convincingly kind of beat TSM 3-1 in the first round. And then, Cloud9 Liquid. Cloud9 played really, really well. Team Liquid actually still looked pretty good in some instances, like Game 2, like that early game in Game 3. But, yeah, TSM, like you said, they're that level below Cloud9 and Liquid for sure.
Yep, and the one last thing that I want to ask you, this was actually a take on Hotline tonight. I didn't know that when I put it in my notes here, but do you think Zix gets replaced? And I want to preface why I bring this up. I need to be clear. I don't think, Zix needs to be replaced. And the reason why I say that is because I don't think it's fair to have that opinion without knowing truly what goes on behind the scenes. But when you do have a team that started off looking so well and they just get worse and worse and worse over the course of the split, people are usually going to look to the coach. Now, that's why I bring up that question. Do you think Zix gets replaced? Not necessarily before summer, but do you think he gets replaced going into next year? Me, I say yes. I think before next year, I don't think Zix is coaching 100 Thieves.
I would say it's probably dependent on their summer performance. I think if, for whatever reason, they go into the summer split and on their current form, I would say they're probably a middle-of-the-pack LCS team. If they open up the gates in summer and they're like anywhere in like the 4-4 or 3-5 range, I could see Zix getting the can maybe early on in the split and then bringing in somebody else. Or if this team doesn't make Worlds or disappoints in playoffs again, I think that's definitely a scenario where Zix could get let go. And I mainly say that because not for this exact reason, we're looking up some of the player contracts, specifically for 100 Thieves, and this entire roster is signed to 2022 and beyond. Some players' contract ends end of 22, others 2023, and this is a team that has played together before and vocally came out and said that they wanted to play together this season. So I think for 100 Thieves, it's more likely that the coach goes first before the roster goes first, since all their players are under contract for the next 1.5 years.
Yep. And the one thing, because I do like making the comparison to traditional sports when it makes sense to. This is one where I think it's not the same, because if this was traditional sports and you saw a team tank like that, there is a bunch of coaches that you can have confidence in knowing what they're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as we've heard from so many players, there's not a lot of confidence in LCS coaches. And so I don't know if there's a bunch of coaches out there that you're willing to go with over Zix. You know what I'm saying? So maybe maybe 100 Thieves is looking for another coach, but they just don't find anyone that they have confidence in. That could be possible as well, right? So that's just the last thing that I wanted to mention there. Again, I'm not saying they should get rid of Zix. I'm saying that what we've seen out of 100 Thieves, the story kind of looks like this would be the end of a coach for a team that's performing this poorly.
Potentially. I do think it somewhat hinges on their summer performance. I think if this team makes Worlds, regardless of how their Worlds performance goes, I would assume he'd stick around for the season after. But if they put up this same performance at the start of summer or in playoffs, I think change is inevitable with this team.
Yeah, I won't be surprised if Zix is let go. Let's just put it that way. Okay. Yeah, I think that's all I had to say about that. So do you want to get into our awards?
Yeah. Pop up Beansoup, Jamie, who's popping off?
I went with Fudge because we went into the series talking about how important top lane was going to be. I was terrified for the guy because Alfari's been styling on people all split long. Fudge didn't just hold his own. I thought he looked good. And that is a totally drastic, what's the word? Maybe appearance, if there is a better term, but we'll say appearance than what I thought we were going to see. Yeah, wow. I was really impressed with how he could go up against Alfari in this series, and he looked good. I mentioned earlier his Scion was great. And yeah, popping off. Really good to see out of Fudge. He was a big question mark, and I don't think he's a question mark anymore.
Yeah, I think the main thing to point out with Fudge is if you were to before the series, if you would have said that Fudge was able to hold his own against Alfari and wasn't inting, everyone would have said, "Oh my God, that's a success." But in this series, Fudge was putting it to Alfari and was performing very well inside of lane, which was even more than people expected.
Yep. Who do you got? I think I know it.
I had PERKZ, playoff PERKZ,
obviously.
Baby. I think you took a look at all the games in the series. PERKZ played extremely well in games 1, 3, and 4 in terms of what he was able to do with getting camped early on, being put in poor laning situations and still coming out ahead or even inside the laning phase. His Sylas in game 1 was pretty dirty. His Ryze in game 3 was just pumping DPS from the back. And his Lucian in game 4 was really strong. His laning phase was great. He dodged a lot of Alfari ganks. A lot of pressure was thrown at him in games 3 and 4 and was able to come out ahead.
I can't add any more than that. He was great.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on. Who was your Beansoup?
I kind of, I guess, talked about it a little bit, was the 100 Thieves drafting in terms of, the approach that they took to the game, and in turn, the lack of commitment, let's say, is because I think you can kind of look at like the Cloud9 drafts and say they were committed to the early game. They were drafting Renekton, Nidalee, and Kalista with like an engaged support. And while a lot of people could say they don't like that kind of a draft because it's only early game focused, at least that's what they're going for. They're planning to win the early game, and if they don't win, they're going to hard lose the rest of the way. And I kind of thought like the 100 Thieves drafts were like a bit non-committal. It was like, oh, we're going to go this Jace plus this ADC mid, and if we get ahead in lane, that's great. But we also have this like kind of like laid back like scaling-ish jungler in Delilia. But like I said, I would much rather see something more aggressive in the early game because that's the route that they took.
Yeah, I went with the series, with the whole series between TSM and 100 Thieves. Look, I know we've harped on it a lot this episode, but my God, it was really, really bad. Yeah, this is one where I think you're looking at two teams. We mentioned earlier how C9 and TL were taking their advantages. This just felt like teams were giving away advantages, and that's not how you want to see League of Legends go. I will say the series was still fun because it was a fiesta, no pun intended, but I don't want to see that many fiestas in playoffs. I think it's way more fun to watch them in regular season. These are teams that could be representing us on an international stage, and when it comes time to playoffs, I'm hoping that we see something better than what we saw. So yeah, I just had to give it to the whole series. It was quite bad from both squads, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's the thing that's like a little bit worrying is you think to summer a little bit and you look at our like playoff picture even in summer and our world spots. We have Cloud9 and Team Liquid, and then we're gonna have another spot that could go to like one of Team at TSM, 100 Thieves, EG, and a way that they're all performing. I think all three of those teams would get absolutely shit stomped at Worlds. I would even argue that team wouldn't make it out of play-ins.
Yeah, actually, that's something that I hadn't thought of. Yeah, I could see that. Fortunately, we still do have summer. And
They have
how many
time.
games is summer? 27 games?
27 regular season plus like bigger playoffs because there's 8 teams.
And World starts in like September. So there's time, guys. There's time.
Yep.
Play-ins start in September, and then most of Worlds happens in October. So yeah, there is lots of time for these teams to get better, and God, do we hope they do. Yeah. Okay, let's get into finals weekend preview. Saturday,
Saturday,
right?
yep.
Saturday we have TSM versus Team Liquid. I want to see TSM look the way they did the last time they played Team Liquid. Please, for the love of God. Because I still think TSM can look better. We harped on how bad they looked, but we've seen them look good not that long ago. So it is possible, right?
Yeah,
Right?
it's possible. However, just the way that the teams have been trending, I think, at least in my opinion, TSM is on a bit of a downward trend. Team Liquid is kind of equal. I don't think my opinion is either, dropped or raised based on their 2 playoff series so far. And if we're going with that logic, I'm going to have to go with it's Team Liquid.
Yep, I'm going with Team Liquid 3-0. I'll just get it out now. I think that they were, like I said, they looked really good in the TL-TSM series the first time around. I said that was the best we had seen a team all split long. And then they just got bested by a better C9 in the last series. But again, I still think they played well. I know a lot of people don't think that, but I think they played well. I think they just ran into a C9 that was at their peak. And so, yeah, I've seen nothing but good things out of TL since playoffs. And I've seen quite a bit of bad out of TSM. So it's that simple for me. And I will also say that I think they pretty much get gapped in just about every role except maybe AD carry, right?
We're talking about jungle or
TSM TL.
Yeah, I would say
every role.
jungle is the closest.
Hmm.
I would also say mid lane is close depending on the champion matchup. I would say if we're going control mage versus control mage, I would say the lane that's pretty neutral. But I think if Jensen is on like a Twisted Fate or like a Silas even into like a Power of Evil control mage, I just have more faith in Jensen's ability to either get a lead and then play around said lead or go and impact the map elsewhere.
I would have said mid lane would have been close. I may have even put it in Power of Evil's favor before playoffs started. But since
maybe.
playoffs have started, I think Jensen's looked really, really good, especially in the series against TSM. My God, he played so many different champions, and he looked good on all of them.
Yeah,
it's like we saw Jensen get a playoff buff, and so that's why I'm all of a sudden. If people are wondering, like, why is your opinion changed so much? It's because Jensen has changed so much just in the couple of playoff series that we've seen him play. I think he's looked great, and yeah, I gotta give the advantage to him. I think he makes more happen on the map than PoE at the moment.
Yeah, I would say in case scenarios, it's only close in mid and jungle. But the rest, I would definitely agree. Alphari still got a big advantage top lane. Even like with that whole series against Fudge, I still favor Alphari. My opinion of Alphari has not changed whatsoever. He's still, again, in my opinion, if I was to vote MVP right now, I would still pick Alphari. If I were to pick a best player in the league, I would still pick Alphari. And Core JJ is Core JJ, so yeah.
I mean, let's be honest, Core JJ has been better than Sword Art. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean Sword Art's been awful, but Core JJ, he's probably he's probably the best support we've ever had, right? Have we had a better support in North America?
I don't think so.
I don't really think so either, to be quite honest. Anyways, yeah, definitely going 3-0 TL on that one. I'm
Maybe
gonna put
like
a little bit more thought into this one
season
because
6 Aframu, CLG MSI in that.
it's hard to compare, right?
Yeah, I
Through
know.
years,
You can't. I would
it
still say
really
Core
is
JJ.
difficult. It really is difficult. Yeah, I would probably say core, but what I was gonna say was I will put more thought into the series prediction on this one. There's a chance I give TSM a game. There's no chance I'm giving them more than that. But for now, I'm going TL 3-0. I just think they're flat out better. I think that they will get the advantages in the early game, like TSM has given up so often, and I don't think TL is going to let them go the way 100 Thieves did, or the way EG did.
Yeah, with my series prediction, I'm going to take the exact same approach that I did with my TSM 100 Thieves prediction. It should be a 3-0, but it's going to be a 3-1. Just because TSM will win a game at some point. Team Liquid is going to fuck up in some sort of fashion, whether that's they do something like they did in Game 3 with their sort of 180 in draft phase, or TSM kind of gets this scaling comp and, like, I don't know. I know both teams like to play scaling comps, but TSM might just like get a game where their scaling comp is better.
I gotta give you props, by the way, because for those that don't know, JNT's been pretty good on his predictions lately.
I have my playoff predictions.
Huge props
minus
to JNT on that one.
Minus the Dignitas 100T one, all my predictions are going pretty well.
Yeah, you've done pretty well with that. I gotta give you props for that. Anything else before we move on to C9 versus Winner?
Yeah, we'll just talk about C9 here, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. I think that they're going to be playing TL. And you mentioned on Hotline that if this matchup were to happen again, that you don't think it'll be as easy for it to just repeat itself because C9 was playing towards their ceiling. Is that an accurate representation of your take?
Say that again, sorry. Just
that you don't think it's going to be an automatic repeat of what happened because C9 was playing at their absolute ceiling, and it's not automatic that they'll play that way again.
Yeah, I did think that, you know, Cloud9, this is the best that we've seen Cloud9 all split long in terms of playing up to their potential. When you go back and look at Cloud9's games throughout the entire spring split, the solid majority of it was Blabber getting his lead and carrying through Blabber. And on the flip side, in their losses, it's when Blabber isn't able to get enough done in the early game and their other lanes themselves can't really get a lead by themselves. And in this game, you really saw every role just able to get a lead regardless. Fudge versus Alfari was doing a great job. Blabber versus Santorin. Blabber just had a ton more impact in the early game. PERKZ versus Jensen. PERKZ was going even despite being camped mid. And in game 1, we saw a really nice Kalista game out of Sven. And in game 4, we saw a really nice Ashe game, an Ashe Braum game out of Sven Vulcan.
Yeah, and you and I will make our predictions day of when we know who is in the finals. So that's not like, don't worry, we will make a prediction for that.
Should just like a little precursor one?
The thing is it's kind of hard because like we'll have more obviously we'll have more information after TSM TL, so there's a chance that we change. But I mean, if it's TSM, I'm going Cloud9 3-0, and if it's TL, I'm going Cloud9 3-2. Let's go with that for now.
And say it again what they were, sorry?
I said if it's TSM, I will go Cloud9 3-0. If it's TL, I will go Cloud9 3-2.
Yeah, if it's TL, I'll say Cloud9 3-1, Cloud9 3-1 again. And I think I'll honestly just go with 3-1 again. I'll go 3-1 either way in Cloud9's favor.
Interesting. Yeah, the last thing that I'll say about it is, well, first of all, it's very clear that I think 9 is going to be our representative MSI, but I think it's because of what I mentioned earlier, where they're able to play multiple styles and play them very, very well. That's the thing that I think being able to go into a series with a bunch of different weapons and being difficult to draft around, that's such an important strength when it comes time to 5-game series. So yeah, I think C9 is going to go to MSI, and I actually think that they'll represent us well. I know that people don't really have a lot of faith in North America, and I understand why. I get that, but I think they'll look okay. I don't think they're going to win MSI or anything. I just don't think that they'll embarrass us. But we'll have to wait and see. Yeah. We'll have to wait and see if they are our representative, and we'll make a reassessment after we get more information after the next weekend games.
Mm-hmm.
Is that it for the preview? I think it is.
I think it is.
Okay, let's get into some quick news. So actually, before we get into some quick news, I want to bring up another one of my little theories. Zix was the first one. This other one, people might laugh at this because there's not like a whole lot of evidence, but there is some. I think that we're going to see C9 Meteos. as a content creator, specifically for his co-streams. And if people are wondering, okay, where did this come from? A couple of things. So one, he was wearing a Cloud9 sweater the whole series, for both of the series this weekend, and people are going to be like, hey, he was wearing a sweater. Relax, man. I didn't think of anything about the sweater. I was like, oh, cool, nice sweater. But then there was this Twitter clip that was released today of Cloud9. It was like hashtag play together. I don't know what the heck it is yet. They're talking about announcing something soon. And at the end, Meteos' voice comes in, and I hear Meteos' voice saying, I don't even know what, but it's like, when was the last time Meteos was part of Cloud9? It was forever ago. And now in some of their content, in some of their posts on social media, I hear Meteos' voice. I'm like, that seems random. And then I missed it the first time around, but I was rewatching the Cloud9 TL series. I see in the chat Jack talking to Meteos, saying like, "Oh, that's a nice sweater you got there," and he's like, "Yeah, this thing's super cozy." So clearly, they recently sent him this stuff. These are little things, guys. I know that I might be stretching here. I'm aware of that. I think it's possible that we see C9 Meteos though. So I just thought that that's some weird stuff going on there, and I'm just theorizing that there is not a lot of strong things backing me up, just a hunch.
Yeah, it's possible. I think with Doublelift, like going back to TSM as like a streamer or like a content creator or whatever, I think it's definitely possible. I think more orgs are seeming to get a lot more involved in terms of picking up personalities to be like a sort of a sponsor slash content creator. We saw Dom get picked up by C9 as a like content creator slash personality. We see a ton of that in the streaming world with big orgs picking up top streamers. 100 Thieves does a lot of that in terms of like their content creation and branding side of things. I definitely think it's no like there's no downside to that kind of a move. So I think
Meteos
really
is
good.
a huge memer, and Cloud9 loves that. And I'll also say the TriCast has been ridiculously successful between Sneaky, Meteos, and Doublelift. And I mean, his numbers have not been crazy because most people watch the Doublelift co-stream, but his numbers are going up still.
Yeah.
At the start of his co-streaming, he was getting about 1,000 to 1,200 viewers. He's up to about 2K. And I know that's with playoffs and stuff like that, but yeah, I think that it's really smart. Why would you invest so much money in sponsoring the LCS when you get great viewership in the co-streams, and it's probably way cheaper to sponsor these guys? So, we'll see. Anyways, that was my little piece.
Before we go quick news, I just wanted to pull up the prediction records just because I forgot to when we were talking about it.
True.
They're on screen now. I've gained an extra win because I predicted Cloud9 over Team Liquid. So there you go.
Falling behind.
Those are the predictions right there. I'm up for our audio only people. My record on the season is 83-40. Blue Jays is 81-42.
I don't know what to think of these records though. They seem good, right? But like, it's too bad we didn't do this in past years because I would want to know like how am I doing relative to how I normally do, kind of thing. But anyways, maybe we'll get that as the years go on.
Yep.
Anyway,
quick news. Not a lot of quick news because it feels like news in general is ramping down with less and less teams playing. But we wanted to quickly just talk about LCS viewership real quick because I feel like the topic gets brought up week in and week out, how the LCS viewership is low, specifically when you compare it to the LEC viewership. Yeah, not a ton of viewers, at least.
I don't think it's that bad, honestly. I really don't. I think, one, we know the LEC is a better league. We've talked about that 1,000 times. So I think you're naturally going to get more viewers there. But also, even though there is usually a raid from people going from the LEC over to the LCS broadcast, you do need to remember that it's way easier for North American fans to watch the LEC because it's on during the day. It's way more difficult for European fans to watch the LCS because it's on late at night. And I know there's still a lot of European fans that watch. I get that. But to me, like, I think it makes sense that you lag way behind the LEC. I think that the advantage is there for the LEC for a few reasons. And the main one being that their league is just better.
Yeah, the main thing that I just want to say, like, on the point where it's much more difficult for the LEC viewers to watch the LCS just basically because of like the time that the series comes on for them is like, think about it in reverse for us LCS viewers. Like if you're an East Coast person and you get a best of 5 series that goes pretty long, that series is ending like anywhere between like 9 and 10 o'clock. And like imagine having to watch another best of 5 that could possibly go, 5
True.
games on like a Sunday night or something. Like you're not necessarily going to stay up and watch that whole thing. So I can definitely see like from the LEC side of things, like they can't really commit to watching LCS because it's late for them anyways. And if it's like a weekend, they got stuff to do if it's like a Monday coming up.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point too on the Sunday specifically. Yep,
Mm.
makes a lot of sense.
Next up, we kind of talked about this briefly at the top of the episode. The MSI groups have been announced. Basically, for those who don't know, the way that MSI is working is all of the regions are placed into 3 separate groups, with each region being placed in like a tier of like level. And the tier 1 teams were the LPL, the LEC, and the LCK. The tier 2 teams were the VCS, which is the Vietnamese League, the PCS, which is the former LMS, and the LCS. And I'm kind of going in order, and that means that the LCS is in the same group as the LCK for MSI, and the rest of the teams are the LCL, which is the Russian league, the TCL, which is the Turkish league, the LLA is the Latin America one, the LCO is the new Oceanic League, the CBLL is Brazil, and the LJL is Japan. So it doesn't really matter too much for the wildcard regions, quote unquote. But for the top-ish regions, LPL and Vietnam are in the same group. LEC and former LMS are in the same group, and then LCK and LCS are in the same group. So you could argue that we kind of drew the short end of the stick, because the way that things are sort of shaping out, I think Damwon or Genji is going to be a pretty tough out.
I would say for like the bottom ones, I would probably want to stay away from CB Law. Like which team would probably be the strongest? I think the CB Law would be stronger than LJL or LCO, which is the Australian one. The LJL is Japan, and they haven't really had that great of teams in the past, honestly.
Yeah,
So
not since
that's
like
one that the
season 8.
LCS has. Let me just recap. So the group C that the LCS is in is LCK, LCS, LLA, which is Latin America, and then LJL Japan. So yeah. I don't know. It's not the greatest of groups to be in, but I mean,
Yeah,
that's
whatever.
the way it's gonna be. Yep. At least
Speaking
you're gonna get a
of,
good test.
yeah,
Go ahead.
it'll be fun to see. Like, whatever. Speaking of Damwon a little bit, their world skins from season 10. Obviously, if you didn't know, Damwon won Worlds in season 10 not too long ago. Their world skins are out. Well, they're not out, but the artwork is out. So we know the champions. We know what they're gonna look like. I don't know. Usually they kind of drop the world skins kind of around the MSI time, just because it's kind of like a fitting time to do that. If you haven't seen them, I'm not going to put them on screen just because the quality is not very good. Probably won't do them justice, but feel free to look it up. But the champion skins are Kennen, Nidalee, Twisted Fate, Jin, and Leona. And from what I've seen of the splash arts, they look pretty cool. I mean, I definitely think that I'll probably end up getting one of them. I usually get like 1 or 2 world skins depending if I play the champion or not. I might get one of them. They look cool.
Yeah, and like you said, you could Google it and you'll find it. There's no problem there. You'll be able to have a look at them. So yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
That is it for quick news this week. So yeah, not that much happening. Why do I get the feeling that things are gonna happen? Like now that we do our episode, a bunch of that's just always how it happens.
Zix is getting fired tomorrow, and like Selfmade's gonna be released from Fnatic or something like that.
Yeah,
not actually gonna happen, but
for those that missed it, Selfmade before playing against Schalke said that if he loses to Gilius, he's gonna be going to NA next year. So, welcome Selfmade to the LCS, brother.
Yeah.
Obviously he's got it. Well, I mean, I think he's joking. Anyways, maybe he does come to the LCS next year. Who knows? But I don't think that that's any indication of anything just yet. But that's going to be it for this week's episode. Thanks everyone who was active in the live chat. We appreciate you all. And guys, we've seen our numbers going up across all of our platforms. We do recognize you guys. I have started to recognize some of the names in the comments section. And we also have a Discord as well. That we just did our first live viewing this week with your boy Large Frog in the chat. If anybody wants to, we're probably going to do some in the future. It's nice to try to get to know some of you guys. That's one of the advantages of having a smaller community, mind you. Yeah, it's growing, but I mean, when you still have a small community, I think it's cool to get to know some of you guys. So don't hesitate to join the Discord and to hop in the next time that we do a viewing party, because I think it'll be fun to try to get to know our viewers that we see so often. I'm starting to recognize some of those names. So thank you guys so much for all of your support across all of our platforms. Anything else you want to shout out, JNT?
No.
Oh, we should shout out the thing tomorrow one more time.
Again, prop
tomorrow.
sheet, 9 p.m. EST, 6 p.m.
Free to
PST.
enter.
Yeah, there's gonna be a prize. We haven't exactly decided on said prize.
We've
But
talked about a couple of things, maybe some RP, maybe an Amazon gift card. Well, we'll make it so that there's something that you win. Don't worry, we're not gonna give nothing. That's no fun. We want you to be able to play for something, and we don't want you to have to risk anything. It's just one cool way of being able to interact with our community. So we will do that tomorrow. Be sure to think of some creative ideas. It doesn't hurt to throw out an idea. Let's just say that. I think it'll be fun. So start thinking of some cool stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And again, I think that's it. So thanks again, guys. This has been episode 36 of the Clown Fiesta podcast. We will see you next week.